Okay, so we are live. Well, bem-vindos, bem-vindas, welcome. My name is Fábio Zucker. I'm an anthropologist and journalist focused on denouncing human rights violations, mainly in Brazil. And today I have the pleasure and the immense responsibility to mediate this conversation with Rula Daood, co-national director of Standing Together, and Uri Weltmann, national field organizer for Standing Together. I'd like to thank Rula, Uri, for making time to be with us today. And I'd also like to thank our audience, people who are interested to know a little bit more about Standing Together and the position of the movement towards this increasingly violent scenario that we see in Israel, Palestine, the occupied territories. Just one technical.
Eu tenho aqui só uma questão técnica. Agora eu vou falar em português.
That in English. So, para quem está ouvindo a gente, para quem não fala inglês, para quem quer ouvir a tradução, vocês têm a opção embaixo do link que vocês estão no webinário, no link interpretação em português. E vocês podem escolher, então, para ouvir em inglês ou em português. Onde vocês, conforme vocês escolherem, se vocês quiserem me ouvir falando em inglês, e ouvir eles falando inglês, vocês podem clicar. Se não, temos duas excelentes tradutoras com a gente que vão ajudar e traduzir ao português. Esse é um pequeno recado. So I just explained to our audience that they could click to have the consecutive translation in English. If I may, I'd like to introduce Rula and Uri, and then we can start with the first questions. So Rula is the co-national director of Standing Together, and she is a speech pathologist in her training and former profession. She started her activism in her current city of Lod around issues of women's rights and gun violence, as well as promoting partnerships in mixed cities. Rula worked as a community organizer at Standing Together for 2 years, where she produced numerous events and organized protests with hundreds of activists before being appointed a co-national director alongside Alonley Green. Uri Weltmann is a national field organizer for Standing Together and a founding member of the movement in 2015. A long-time peace and anti-occupation activist, he also has a background in neighborhood community organizing and LGBT political organizing. He was born in 1984, lives in Tel Aviv, and with his partner and their 2 daughters. Thank you so much, Uri. Thank you so much, Rula. It's a pleasure to have you here today with us. I imagine you must be overwhelmed with the disastrous scale of violence in the region since the brutal attacks of Hamas on the 7th of October, the disproportionate violence of the Israeli military response in Gaza, the intensification of the occupation in the West Bank, and the rise of authoritarian politics inside Israel. And I'd like to say also to express the words that within our group and with colleagues, we find the Standing Together movement to be one of the most interesting, powerful movements happening in the region, in the world. We learn a lot with you. We follow everything, all the speeches, all the debates, all the media interviews, the actions, such as this week, attempt to bring food to Gaza. We follow that closely within our group and with our colleagues. So thank you so much for all this amazing work you do and for being here with us today. So over the years, I learned that the best interviewer is the one who doesn't talk much, is the one who only asks. And I'd like to start to give you plenty of space, plenty of time, and we're eager to hear from you. So without further ado, the first question is if you could introduce us to the movement. What is the Standing Together movement? How was it born? How do you organize?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah. Standing Together is a grassroots political movement in Israel, founded in 2015. It currently has more than 5,000 members throughout Israel, both Jewish citizens of Israel as well as Palestinian citizens of Israel. Not many people know, but around 20% of the citizens of the state of Israel per se are Arab Palestinians who form a national minority, nominally equal citizens with citizenship and eligible to vote to the parliament, to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, but in fact being discriminated against in all walks of life. And standing together as a grassroots political movement unites both Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel to campaign and mobilize and organize people in pursuit of Israeli-Palestinian peace and against the occupation, for equality and against racism and discrimination, and for social justice and an alternative to the neoliberal austerity politics that dominate Israel for decades. We're a movement grounded in socialist values. We have a socialist world outlook, and we see the interconnectedness of the various issues affecting our society. We are not a single issue NGO that only does peace advocacy or only does anti-racist work, but we're active on numerous issues. For the past few years, we have built Standing Together as a force on the ground with many local groups spread throughout Israel, both in big cities like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and Haifa, but also in localities such as the Negev Desert in the southern part of the country or the area in the Galilee around Nazareth. And we also have presence on university and college campuses, with our student clubs becoming one of the most powerful force in student politics in Israel, winning key positions in elections to student unions. Like I said before, Standing Together is a member-led organization. We now have more than 5,000 members who pay monthly dues, who get together every 2 years for a convention to democratically elect the leadership of the movement. The last such conventions was held in February, where around 1,000 people gathered in Haifa for the 4th National Convention of Standing Together to assess our strategy, to sum up the experience of the past 2 years, to plan for the future, and to democratically elect our new movement leadership. And following October 7th, Standing Together had been an important force on the ground in raising the demand for a ceasefire agreement that would allow the return of the hostages and stop the killing of innocent people in Gaza, in making a statement against the war and for Israeli-Palestinian peace, which we think is the only way to secure safety and security for both peoples. And like yourselves here, people abroad make notice of our work on the ground. But for us, we must say it openly, our work is first and foremost directed inwards towards Israeli society. We speak in Hebrew and Arabic, and the majority of our work goes into changing the political atmosphere inside Israeli society to organize people and to build a capacity for a progressive social and political transformation of Israeli society. We're an optimistic movement. We think reality can turn for the better, and we think that when people unite and organize around their shared mutual interests, then this progressive social transformation can be successful. For the past 9 years of Standing Together's existence, we have made wins, we have achieved victories in various campaigns and struggles we have been involved in, which reinforces our optimism, and our motto, where there is struggle, there is hope, underscores the Standing Together political project. We try to unite people to fight, to struggle for progressive change, and from this stems our optimism. This is, in a nutshell, what Standing Together is.
Thank you. Rula, could you also comment about the movement, please?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think Uri summed it up in a great way. Uri is also one of the founders of Standing Together. Our movement started at the end of 2015, and back then, yet again, it was a time where there was much violence, racism, and fear in our cities, in Palestinian cities, Jewish cities, mixed cities inside of Israel. And a group of activists understood that we cannot maintain a society and a place where we live in fear, where we have violence, and where the government that understands how it benefits from having us in a reality of war is working against the people living not just in Israel, but also in Palestine, whether it's the West Bank or Gaza. So our movement just began in the first call out for people to demonstrate against, yet again, a place of fear coming from another war between Israel and Gaza. And that first demonstration was able to bring thousands of people to march in the streets, demanding a different future, demanding peace, a Israeli-Palestinian peace, and demanding from the government. And again, it was a Bibi Netanyahu government for a different politics. And I think since 2015, what we understood is that we can't just mobilize people in the streets and call out for people to come and demonstrate. We understood that we need a different path, a different political path, and a different ideology that sees all the people living inside of Israel, in the Israeli society, as supposed to be equals and fighting for different, and not just one issue, but different issues in our societies, in our society, to have equality, to have freedom, to have social justice inside of the Israeli society. And since that moment, we understood that we also needed to organize people. And I think 2 years after that first demonstration, that is what Standing Together began doing, organizing people. And since then, as we have said, these past 9 years, we have grown to a place where we have chapters all over the country. We are one of the biggest campus powers with students in the campuses, and trying to build the real political will inside of the Israeli society to have a real change. Because it's not just that what we believe that where there is struggle, there is hope. We also believe that the only ones that can really affect the lives and the politics in our society and in our country are the people living in that society. And that is why we do what we do each and every day for the past 9 years, to build that majority inside of the Israeli society, to make a real lasting change in the politics in Israel and hopefully also in the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it's amazing to hear from you, and we learn a lot from your struggle, from the power of them.
Só em ouvir vocês esse poder do movimento. Isso me deixa bastante
And one thing I'd like to ask you also is how you got personally involved with the movement. If you could talk a little bit of your personal involvement and your participation. Perhaps you could start with Rula and then go back to Uri.
Well, yeah, of course. Well, I think each one of us has a different story, and it goes back also to the different backgrounds. As Uri have also mentioned, in Israel, there are 20% Palestinian citizens. We are an ethnic group, a minority inside of the Israeli society. And growing up as a minority inside of Israel, most of us are brought up to be non-political. I was brought up in a home, in a village in north of Israel called Kufr Yasif, and to parents who have lived through the martial laws in Israel. And living under martial laws, it means not having equal rights, being persecuted, and in various occasions also being jailed for saying anything political. So that was the home I grew up in, and I wasn't supposed to be political. But in daily life, living as a minority, racism and inequality is something that you face in each and every day, in small acts and small actions and small events. And in many times it accumulates to a place where you have to decide, what kind of a path do we take? Do I stay silent and try to live under a place where I am oppressed and persecuted? Or do I stand up and take a chance to make a difference? And for me, at least, the major thing that happened to me was yet again another war in 2014, and being in a place where around me there were people who, in one of the harshest wars between Israel and Gaza, there was a newspaper in a city where I worked in Ashdod, in the south of Israel. And in the newspaper, there were a page, the first page had the faces of the Palestinian kids from Gaza who were killed by the bombings at that year. And a woman just made a remark in that place, in that bakery, and said that, you know, all of them should die. All of their kids should die. All of the people living in Gaza should die, and they should all burn. And that was a moment where, you know, as a minority, in many times you choose to be silent and to not speak because you might be more afraid because it's time of war. But at that incident, I chose to speak up. And my act was telling her that there are kids, there are babies, and they are victims of the wars, and they're also victims of the way she conceived what was happening. And I think that was the moment I wanted to do something more, to be part of a bigger struggle. And looking out for political places, I couldn't find my place in, you know, in parties in Israel, inside of Israel. It's either I was too feminist, too young, too radical, or too Palestinian for most of them. And the first time I saw Standing Together was at the beginning of 2017 in a demonstration in Jerusalem. And at that moment, I saw a woman shouting out and screaming out against another demonstration in both languages, Arabic and Hebrew. And I saw people following her. And I understood that there is a place, a political place in this society that speak both languages, has both Arabs and Jews in it, and believes in partnership, in equality, in social justice, and in ending the occupation and in having real peace in this place. And since then, I became an activist of Standing Together. So I've been part of the movement since, you know, early 2017 and until this day, and took part in many struggles we've had during these years. Uri.
Thank you. Thank you, Rula.
I grew up in a city called Kfar Saba to the northeast of Tel Aviv, which was a fairly homogeneous city, all Jewish. Although there are nearby Arab towns and cities like Tira and Taibe and Jaljulia, we never interacted. And when I went to university in Haifa University in the northern part of Israel, this was the first time in which I was immersed in an environment that was really binational. Haifa University is located close to the Galilee, which is a center of the Arab-Palestinian minority within Israel. And at the time when I was a student there 20 years ago, around a third or 40% of the students were Arab Palestinians. So the campus was really mixed. You can go in the corridors of the campus and hear both languages being spoken, Hebrew and Arabic. And it was very visible and present and also politicized, the campus, because there were Arab students organizing to promote equality for them and against various forms of discrimination by the student union or by the university authorities. And there were right-wing students or racist students organizing against equality to keep racist policies in order. So the campus was political and I was politicized. And one of the big things that we did at the time was to run for the student union elections, but put together a slate of candidates comprised both of Jewish students as well as Arab Palestinian students, which was something that polarized the campus. Because on the one hand, you would have right-wing Jewish groups who contested against us who would say that, well, you just can't elect a Palestinian to represent us. That's not the way to go. But on the other hand, you also had a Palestinian group that ran a slate of all Palestinian candidates that said Palestinian students can't have Jewish students represent them. We said that nationality is important, but political stance and worldview is also important. And we want Jewish students to elect students who represent their worldview regardless of their nationality, be them Palestinian or Jewish, and vice versa. We won 40% of the vote, but lost the elections. But it was a ground-shattering moment in campus political life, and also a very important moment for me personally in my political development, because we contested on such a big scale, such an enormous task. I completed my studies, went to become a teacher, moved to a neighborhood in Haifa called Hadar, which is a multicultural working class neighborhood with both a Palestinian minority and an ultra-Orthodox Haredi minority, immigrant workers, African asylum seekers, Russian-speaking immigrants from the former USSR, very diverse neighborhood, in which I started to become involved in community organizing, setting up all sorts of local residence initiatives to pressure the municipality to allocate more resources, to solve the problem of police brutality that people in the neighborhood across the various communities faced. And in 2012,
Em 2012,
setting up a local LGBT coalition, demanding that the Haifa municipality would allocate more budgets and resources to the LGBT community and its organizations. And we organized a very political pride parade. It was not a street party. It was a demonstration for equality, ending on the footsteps of the building of the municipality. I was the spokesperson for the LGBT Haifa Pride Coalition. And all of these initiatives taught me the power of community organizing, of getting people together in a grassroots initiative, thinking out their interests, thinking out how to build the capacity, the power to enact the change that they want to do in the world. The power of multilingual organizing, of speaking both in Hebrew and Arabic and other languages, the power of organizing across difference, of not ignoring the differences between the various communities, but while noting the difference between the various communities, also noting the shared mutual interests that have the potential, the possibility to unite us across this difference. And in 2015, I was part of the small group that's founded Standing Together, because we felt this message was very much lacking in the Israeli political arena, uniting both Jewish and Palestinian citizens across difference, across language, across nationality and ethnic background, around mutual interest, grounded in a socialist worldview that see the interconnectedness of peace and equality and social justice. And we built the movement ever since, from small beginnings into what it is now. We're still a fairly small movement of 5,000 people in a country of around 9 million, but because we are not a loose collective of people who are free thinkers, but a movement that is structured and organized, we are able to punch above our weight and to impact the political conversation in a way that far surpasses our small numerical size in Israeli society.
Amazing, amazing, whole amazing, Uri. I should say that I don't think 5,000 people is a small movement, but I understand your point, and it's amazing that 5,000 people can influence the political discussions and the political spheres in Israel, the political arena, the debates. So for me, there is something, from what I understand, about the Standing Together, following your movement from far away, is that the movement puts itself in a radical opposition to the extremism of two sides, a double opposition to those who benefit from the status quo of occupation and its use of violence. And usually what we would expect during wartime is that the tensions and polarization tend to increase. Nevertheless, what we see in Israel is precisely, it looks like it's the opposite. This Standing Together is growing, it's becoming stronger as a movement inside Israel, and it's gaining international relevance. And as Sally Abed, one of your colleagues, said in an interview recently, earlier this year, to Haaretz, to the Israeli newspaper, the radical right-wing forces are obsessing about standing together. I think this is because we are, for the first time in a long time, convening a political story that is capable of competing with the far-right story. So I'd like to ask, how do you make sense of that? How do you see this process? Is it possible to say that there is a growing frustration among Israelis, both Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, with the high cost of maintaining the occupation? either of you.
Or
Yes.
no. Well, I think I want to take it back to the 7th of October, because the 7th of October was a day that many things have changed. And as you have said, many people inside of the Israeli society, whether they were Jews or Palestinians, understood that the status quo cannot be maintained. When we look at the Israeli society, and we do have differences between the different ethnic groups, but we also have some kind of mutual agreements on what kind of a life do we want. And when you ask somebody, even before the 7th of October and after the 7th of October, what is the main things that you want? What are the main things you want in your life? Most people will tell you they want their kids to live in safety. They want to go to bed with a roof on their heads. They want to have food on their tables, and they want to feel the security where they live. Now, that didn't change before the 7th of October, and it became a stronger feeling after the 7th of October. And the question that was headed in front of all of us is, how do we really reach after the attack of the Hamas and many people inside, especially the Jewish community inside of Israel, how do we get to a place where we feel real secure after people were massacred, were killed, were kidnapped? But at the same time, for the Palestinian citizens living in Israel, the idea was, how do we also get to a place where we are not persecuted, where we are not the ones who would, in the second place, face the persecution done by the Israeli societies. So how do we get to a place where we do have safety, where we do have equality, but at the same time understand that also people living in Gaza get their safety and also their independence? And that was the main question and a main feeling. And the only thing standing here is, what is the way that we take in order to reach a place where we have safety, where we have real independence, and we have equality between all of the people. And in the 7th of October, the only voice that was heard very loud inside of the Israeli society was the voice of the government, a very right-wing government that we have, and right-wing extremists who had a very clear message and a very clear path. And their message was that now we need to conquer Gaza. We need to transfer 2.2 million Palestinians from Gaza. We need to have settlements inside of Gaza, because this is the only way where we can have safety. But what we say is, and that was the only voice heard months after the 7th of October. But what we say is that this path didn't work years before, because this is not the first war between Israel and Gaza. Before this war, there was yet again another war, and 2 years before it, and 2 years before that one. And if we have learned one thing, is that our government had always said to us that this would be the last war, and only more force and more tactic military work will bring safety to people. But then again, we see another war between Gaza, and yet again we see also Hamas becoming stronger in Gaza. And so we're not reaching a point where people do really have security in their own homes. And what we are saying to people is, this time we do understand that, on the land we live in, you have two people or two nations. You have the Jewish people and you have the Palestinian people. And it's a fact, nobody is going anywhere. We are staying here in Israel, Palestine. Nobody has another place to go to. And the wars we've had before and the kind of politics wanting more wars didn't change the reality of any of us. So this time, it's time for us to decide on a different path. And we believe that the only path that can give us a different future to everybody who's living inside of Israel, the West Bank, and in Gaza, is a path that speaks of agreements and political agreements, and a path that brings, understands that both people deserve their independence, both people deserve their security, both people deserve their freedom and their liberty. And the only way to get to that place is by understanding that we need to reach, a real peace, a real Israeli-Palestinian peace. And that can be reached only when you can have real agreements and political agreements, and not just having, more attacks and more power and more army and more military. And I think us bringing that voice and saying it loud and clear after the 7th of October, and unfortunately also being the first ones and maybe the only ones speaking that voice inside of the Israeli society, has given us a different path and different people also to relate to that message. Because many people inside of Israel understood that the status quo cannot be maintained, and many people are asking for solutions from our government. And what our government is giving is not a solution. We're only seeing more bombings, more death, the hostages not coming back. And the only time they did come back was by an agreement with Hamas. So people are understanding that you need a different path. And it's not the path that we are seeing right now. And us bringing that different voice made, also other people inside of the Israeli society see that there can be an alternative, another alternative that is not just speaking of wars and taking the path of wars.
Thank you, Hula. Uri, would you like to add something on that subject?
Yes, it is very obvious that Israeli politics is in crisis. It's obvious by the fact that for the past 5 years, we had 5 election cycles, consecutive elections, all stemming from the instability of the existing party political system. And as part of this general crisis of Israeli politics, the Israeli left, or those parties that historically are anchored to the idea of Israeli-Palestinian peace, are also in crisis. When I was a child in elementary school, the Labour Party in Israel had 1/3 of the seats in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. To its left, there was a left social democratic party called Meretz that had 10% of the seats in the parliament. But in the recent elections held in November 2022, a year and a half ago, Meretz lost its parliamentary representation, disappearing from the national political arena for the first time in 30 years. The Labour Party barely made past the threshold and elected parliamentarians, and in public opinion, one after the other. Since January 2023, it is receiving 0 seats in the Knesset, and the parties that represent the Palestinian minority in Israel are also losing their representation. One of them, Balad, that was represented since 1996, failed to pass the threshold and be represented in the Knesset, and the other ones are also unstable. So we see not only a general crisis of Israeli politics, but also specifically a crisis of those parties that hail from a left tradition. And when I try to analyze why, I see that many of them have given up on the idea of voicing a different narrative and a different opinion on various questions, social, economic, but also on the main political question on the agenda, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the decades of Israeli military occupation and military control over Palestinians. Israeli politics is like a soccer game in which only one team goes on the field. Rather than having a political debate between those who say we need to maintain the occupation and its rivals who say no, we need to advance to a Palestinian state alongside Israel, the game only has one player on the field. Only the voice that says we need to maintain the occupation, to prolong the military occupation. There's no hope for negotiations with the PLO. There's no hope ever for a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Only this narrative is being spoken in mainstream media and in the political arena. The parties of the left are hesitant to speak on these matters. Their electoral campaigns are directed elsewhere, against the character of Netanyahu, against his corruption charges, defending civil rights and democratic liberties in Israel, All are very important things that should be said. But if there is no alternative to the hegemonic voice that says the occupation will go on indefinitely and Palestinians won't have a state of their own alongside Israel, if there's no political competition between two competing ideas, then only one idea prevails. You quoted Sally Abed, who said that the right wing in Israel is obsessed with standing together. I think her assessment is correct. The right wing in Israel is obsessed with standing together because for the first time in many years, there's a growing political force in Israel that says, no, we should have competition between two ideas. You say we need to maintain the occupation indefinitely. We say that October 7th only proved how bankrupt is the concept of managing the conflict rather than working towards ending it. And we say we need to have negotiations with the Palestinian leadership. And we say we need to have Palestinian statehood. And we need to have Israeli-Palestinian peace based on independence and justice and freedom for both peoples. So many right-wing and extreme right-wing politicians are attacking us disproportionately to the fact that we are a small grassroots social movement, not represented in the Knesset, not having a lot of resources or media attention, but we are being targeted by ministers, members of Knesset, and so on, because we are trying to create political competition, something that traditional parties of the center and center-left in Israel were not being able to do for the past 25 years since the collapse of the Oslo talks. So this is the political context in which we are operating.
Well, that's great. That's amazing. No, it's really great to hear from you. The way you elaborate on how Standing Together is filling this kind of vacuum that existed on the left that could no longer question the hegemonic voice, the militarized pro-occupation solution, which has brought nothing but 7th October. So it's really great to hear from you. I have another question regarding this something that happened, something that actually the movement has organized this week, if I'm not mistaken, on Wednesday. We are all shocked by the way the Israeli military is using starvation as a military weapon, in this warfare against Gazans. And I think we can all say that there is an indiscriminate punishment of the whole Palestinian Gazan society happening now with the Israeli military attacks. And this week, the movement has tried to bring food to Gazans and call attention to this illegal and inhumane use of starvation as a war tactic, as a war weapon. So could you please tell us how was it, what precisely happened, and how do you see this use of starvation as a weapon in war and the attempts from the movement to condemn it and to call attention to this inhumane use?
Yeah, of course. Well, so I think, as the world is seeing what's been happening in Gaza for the past 5 months, since the 7th of October, waking up to the Hamas attack and everything that happened the week after, but then realizing, the retaliation of Israel upon mainly innocent civilians in Gaza, and what had became into a humanitarian catastrophe. And I think a humanitarian, I don't think I have seen in my lifetime, these images of kids being starved to death. And in the last month, all of us have been seeing the starvation in Gaza. People, innocent children, women, men, elderlies, sick people in hospitals. And we know that I think almost 30 hospitals are now out of use in Gaza from 36. And they're only the rest 6, they don't really have enough food or medical supplies. And seeing, Israel, the Israeli government and the military blocking basic humanitarian aid that is necessary for people to live and to get is collective punishment. And even at times of war, collective punishment is a crime. It's not a way to treat people being under war and under siege and being bombed for 5 months. And what we wanted to say and what we tried to achieve was to let also our government and people in the Israeli society understand that in our society, Palestinians and Jewish citizens of Israel do not agree to acts of starvation to almost 2 million people. We do not agree to acts of collective punishment on innocent people, and that we wanted to try and help and to bring a different message that starving people is not a political tactic, and even a military tactic is not a right one to take, and that Israel still has, the responsibility to allow the entrance of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And we called out for people just one more morning, and we said, we want to go to Gaza. We want to see how many of you disagree to what's happening. And we just called out for people to bring humanitarian aid, food. And we were astonished by the amount, the hundreds of people and the thousands of people, calling us and wanting to contribute to that humanitarian aid. And in less than 24 hours, we were able to have a whole truck full of food. And the day after, we just started driving with many other cars following us to the borders to try to bring a different message, not just, to the people in Gaza right now, but also to our government, that these kind of actions are not ones that we agree to as a society. And we did it, 2 weeks ago, and we did it again last week. Unfortunately, the army didn't let us in, because there's no humanitarian aid getting to Gaza today. And the only ones we see are, being dropped by planes. But I do hope, we all hope, that this kind of action that we did would contribute to showing that in our society, people do not agree to collective punishment, and these kind of actions by our government will not bring any change to the way and to what's happening right now in Israel and Gaza. Because starving millions of people will not bring safety, not to the people living in Israel, and of course not to the people living in Gaza. And that the only solution is a solution of agreements, of politics that start to speak about how do we stop this war, how do we stop the killing of innocent people, how do we stop this starvation, how do we really bring back the hostages home alive. And we understand that this happens only with acts of agreements, such as a ceasefire agreement, and sitting down and having negotiations. And 5 months after, I think our governments should be in a place where they understand that what's happening is not bringing any of us any kind of a change or even any kind of a hope to what will happen the day after. So that act was an act to show our disagreement to what's happening in Gaza right now. And we hope, we'll see what we'll do with it next week.
Thank you. Uri, would you like to add something on that issue?
I'll add one little thing. When we took this convoy of emergency aid to the Kerem Shalom border crossing, we had Brazilian television following us, covering this event. We had German television, Swedish television, Canadian television, a Spanish newspaper, an Italian television. What we did not have is proper media coverage by the Israeli press. Actually, the two only journalists who came to cover this event, one was a writer for the Jerusalem Post, which is a newsletter published in English in Israel, and the other was a writer for the English edition of Haaretz, Israeli newspaper. So the only coverage by Israeli media was done in English for international audiences, but we did not have a journalist who covered it in Hebrew for domestic consumption. This, for me, comes to show that Gaza not only has a siege of food supplies and basic medical supplies, there's also a media siege on Gaza, in which Israeli public opinion is completely unexposed to the lived realities of millions of Palestinians who are living in Gaza Strip. It is a shocker for me that a person could sit in Sao Paulo and know more about the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Rafah and Khan Yunis and Gaza City than a person sitting in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or Haifa or Beersheba. Not because the persons in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa are morally deprived, but because our media, our mainstream media, are putting a blockade around the news from Gaza, are treating news that comes out of Gaza not as facts to be reported, but as a PR problem to be analyzed. We had coverage in the Israeli newspapers, the PR problem, the public relations problem of the Israeli government, images of hunger. They don't report the hunger, they don't report the crisis, they report the public relation effects of the crisis. This is a form of media blockade that we need to break through. This is the atmosphere against which we are operating, in which the civilian population in Israel is kept ignorant to the realities that is on the ground a mere dozens of kilometers away from where we are sitting.
Absolutely. And we read that a lot. I mean, we are heavy consumers of Haaretz inside our group. We share with colleagues, we share with friends. And I'd like to hear from you, why do you think that is the situation, that's the case? Why such a blockade? Why we in São Paulo are having access to more information, as you just said, about this inhumane situation that the Israeli government is creating in Gaza, and people in Israel don't have access to it? Is it related to the aftershock of the 7th of October? Is it related also to this right-wing coalition that has been spreading its power across media initiatives? I know Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, has a very strong relationship with a few television channels. I love, as a journalist, I love to hear from you why.
Oh, well, I can give one point, and I think Uri would give this the other one, because I think we have, we agree on why. Well, the first one, there is a blockage on what's been happening in Gaza, not just since the 7th of October, but even before. If you would ask, anybody from the streets in Israel, do you know where Gaza is? And most people can't point to you where Gaza is on a map. And then if you would ask people, do you know that there is in Gaza, there is siege on Gaza? You have a wall, surrounding Gaza. Most people wouldn't know. The daily life of people living inside of Israel has so much blockage that is systematic by the government, by the education system, by the daily media, because this government and the governments before want a society, the people living inside of the Israeli society believing in specific information, and not understanding, the whole situation inside of Gaza, because it benefits the people in the power. Because then when something happens, when you have a war, you would point out to the ones who are responsible, and those ones won't be the Israeli government. So if you've asked anybody before the 7th of October, do you know anything about the siege on Gaza? Most people will tell you they don't know. And after the 7th of October, the attack was so horrible that for a whole month, all of us living inside of Israel, people, whether you were, Jewish or Palestinian, people were afraid. There was that big sense of, a third world war is coming, and everybody is kind of sitting home and waiting for something bigger to happen. And that sense of fear was very true to so many people, especially, the Jewish community, the Jewish people living inside of Israel. And our government also took advantage of that fear to strengthen the voices that would say the only way we will have security is by eradicating Hamas. And when we say eradicating Hamas, we say eradicating everybody in Gaza, because the Israeli government had portrayed everybody living in Gaza as somebody who belongs to Hamas, as a terrorist, or as somebody who wants to kill all the people living inside of Israel. And these, these ideas and what people thought and were told by the government and the media were strongly, inside of people's minds. So it was it is still very hard to convince people, even today, with seeing the starvation in Gaza, that what is happening in Gaza is because of the siege, is because of the blockage. And even if people are convinced, many will tell you it's not because of us, it's because of Hamas, because Hamas initiated the 7th of October. So the way to, first of all, to break that kind of blockage on people's minds is to show, different acts, to show what kind of a reality we want and what's really happening in Gaza, and how do we change that reality, not just for the people living in Gaza, but also for the people living in Israel. Because continuing to a place where we have yet again occupation on Gaza, yet again settlements in Gaza, or having more military inside of Gaza won't benefit also the Israeli society. But I would give it also to Uri, because I think he has another point.
Well, I'm not a media expert, so I'm not in the position to analyze why Israeli media is functioning as such. But I like to point out that for me, the fact that the Israeli political establishment feels that it needs to have this media blockade over Gaza is for me a point of optimism. At times, people abroad who look at Israeli society from the outside tend to write off all Israelis as staunch reactionaries, saying that Israeli society need to be written off as a force of any progressive political and social transformation, because they are all either extreme right-wingers or merely right-wingers. Looking at the outside at Israeli society and reading the news from abroad, one might get that impression. But living inside Israeli society, as Rula and myself do, and standing together being a movement rooted in Israeli society, I feel that the fact that Israeli political establishments needs to conceal reality, needs to have Israeli citizens ignorant about the reality in which we are living, is a source of optimism. People inside Israeli society, Israelis, Jewish Israelis, Palestinian citizens of Israelis, are like any other people in the world. You have your progressives and your reactionaries, your left wing and your right wing, your people who are for the favor of human rights and people who are ethno-nationalists. And the fact that the Israeli political establishment needs to conceal reality only comes to show that people have good intentions, people have open mind, and if people have a better grasp of the reality at hand, the outcry over the policies of the Israeli government would have been far greater. And to prevent such a thing, the political establishment needs to feel that reality needs to be shaken off. This is also one of the reasons why we are optimistic. We live in the society in which we are living. We know our neighbors, the people in our community, our family, our friends, and our co-workers. And we know that inside Israeli society, there exists a potential for change. Breaking the narrative, the dominant narrative, is part of making this change happen, a difficult part, but it is necessary part. Media, mainstream media, is posed against us, and this is one of the challenges in which we are navigating.
That's great. Thank you. I would also like to share with you, Uri and Rula, we organize, it's a small action from here, our group organized a letter to the ambassador, to the Israeli ambassador in Brazil, about the dire situation in Rafah and asking for a ceasefire. We were able to organize, to get the 4 other Jewish communities to sign. Not more than that. It was a bit frustrating for our group as well, but we at least said that letter this week also. One thing just to our audience, our Brazilian audience, we have been receiving all your great questions. As I'm moderating the talk, I'm not in the position to select them, but André is helping me, and he's trying to synthesize your great questions, and I will ask Rula and Uri about them in a few moments. So we'll have time for that in the end of our talk. And so coming back to the questions I had prepared, Rula and Uri, I would like, from understanding, the movement is also involved in other left-wing political agendas connected with the words left. In a way, it involves activism regarding feminism and women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, and environmental justice. So could you tell us a little bit more about it? And how do you envision life like for all the people living between the river and the sea?
Well, Standing Together has a holistic worldview. We are not a single issue NGO that does only work on peace or only work on women's rights or only anti-racist work, but we see the interconnectedness between the various issues. Therefore, we're involved in various campaigns and struggles, both against the war and for a ceasefire agreement and for an Israeli-Palestinian peace in the longer term, both against racism towards the Palestinian minority in Israel, but also around the issues of social and climate justice. When there was a wave of killing of women in Israel, a rise in domestic violence, Standing Together was one of the forces on the ground that participated in the women's demonstration and the women's strike of 2018. Standing Together is part of the climate justice movement. We have activists who hail from that tradition. We drafted a document which we call a Green New Deal for Israel, which explains our vision of how Israeli society can reorient towards renewable energies, increase of public transportation, and a just transition for workers who are employed in polluting industries, so that in the transition to a clean, green, renewable industries, these workers won't be left hanging in the air without pay, without a source of income. We have been involved in LGBTQ struggles and campaigns. And most notably, 2 years ago, we launched a campaign called Minimum 40 to raise the minimum wage in Israel to 40 shekels an hour. This campaign was grassroots-led. It began from Standing Together on the ground. We signed up petitions on the street. We leafleted. We drafted a bill, and we approached members of Knesset, members of the Israeli parliament, to co-sponsor it. Initially, we had a core group of co-sponsors who come from various parties of the left. Mossi Raz from Meretz, who's a member of Standing Together, co-sponsored it. Naama Lazimi from the Labour Party, who's also a member of Standing Together, co-sponsored it. Ayman Odeh from the Joint List, and others. We got up to 50 members of Knesset out of 120 to co-sponsor it. And in June 2022, we put it up to a preliminary vote in the Knesset. It was against government opposition. The government opposed it. Nonetheless, our campaign was so powerful that we were able to convince many politicians to abstain or to vote against the position of the government, and we won. It passed in a preliminary vote in the Knesset. Had it not been for early elections called in the summer of 2022, we might have continued on with the process of legislation. For us, it was a big victory because nobody gave a chance to that campaign when we started. Nobody thought that it was an issue that can be won, and most of the...
Podia ser ganha. A maior parte que o salário mínimo em Israel foi capaz de aumentar foi através dos...
the trade union leadership. Now this came as an initiative from a social movement on the grassroots level that was able to impact the political conversation in general and also twist the hand of politicians and make them vote against the will of the government. So for us, it was a big victory. And this comes to show both the plurality of issues that Standing Together is engaged with, but also how our organizing strategy is able to bring together a large number of volunteers to pressure the political system, even at the level of the Knesset and legislation.
Great, thank you, Uri. I think Rula just is not there now. Okay, she's back.
Okay.
Great. Rula, would you like to add something to this question?
I think Uri has said it the best.
Okay, I have my last question, and then we open to the public, to the public questions. And so after the attacks on October 7th, the bombing campaigns of the Israeli army, its complete disregard for Palestinian lives, and the collective punishment of the Palestinian population living in Gaza by the Israeli military, how do you see the political situation inside Israel? Do you think this far-right coalition may soon fall? What could come next? And, if you could offer us some words of hope for those of us, Jews who are very critical, who do not live in Israel, who are very critical of the occupation, the years-long occupation of this military campaign, and still we're absolutely isolated on the left here in Brazil.
Yes, of course. Well, as we know, politics is a competition, and in our society, we very much understand that the voices that are screaming out loud are voices of right-wing people. I would say even messianic people who have dreams of going to bed, sleeping, and waking up, and somehow they will wake up and the 7 million Palestinians living on this land won't be here anymore. Now, these are fantasies, fantasies of expelling a whole nation from this land who see it as their land, their home. And I think in competition, as Uri have said, well, you need another party. You need somebody else speaking a different voice. And since the 7th of October, we've been leading that different voice, that different politics. And it's not just because we believe that this is how people should be thinking. It's just because we see that what the society that we live in, put aside, the differences and the difficult times right now. And yes, at times of war, people become more radical and it becomes easier to pick one side. But we see that the majority inside of our society want to live in a place where they really have security. The only thing that we are doing, and we believe it is a thing that will bring a change, is to build a political will inside of our society, build upon people living inside of the Israeli society who want to have safety in their homes. And as much as the 7th of October was a hard day for all of us living here, also in Israel and also in Gaza, there is an opportunity. We do have an opportunity to change the politics inside of Israel and the Israeli society. We do have an opportunity to bring different politics, and we do have the capacity and the people to build these politics. Now, yes, Uri have said we are 5,000, and it's not a big, grassroots movement, but it is the biggest grassroots movement. And since the 7th of October, we have grown. We've had conventions, meetings, campaigns, demonstrations, in which we had thousands of people marching in the streets of Tel Aviv at the last month, wanting to have a ceasefire agreement and wanting to have a Israeli-Palestinian peace, a rightful peace for everybody, because the 7th of October have told people that people now don't believe in maintaining the conflict. They don't think that the status quo can be maintained. And the only question is, what will be the day after? What kind of solutions do we bring? And our work inside of the Israeli society, the work we believe in as a grassroots movement, is to build a political will to change what's been happening. And the fact that we have been growing despite all of the craziness in our society right now gives us hope. And I know many people look at what we see and see us, marching and doing and having events and having Jews and Palestinians in one room gives you hope. It gives us hope too, because we understand that in our society, and we say it all the time, as much as it can be painful, but the people living in Israel are not the government of Israel. And it's the same way for the people living in Gaza. They are not Hamas. They are not the leadership that they have in Gaza. And what we want people to understand and believe is when you go out and fight for us, you should fight for the people living in Israel, Palestine, in Israel, Gaza, and not for the governments. We do our work in our society. We build that power in here. And I think what we need from people abroad is to speak for both of us, because we say it all the time. Two people living in here, none of us is going anywhere, and it's time for us to understand how do we really, what kind of politics do we really have to make it possible for both of us to live in security and independence and in safety.
Thank you, Rula. Amazing words. Uri, would you like to add
Well,
something?
I think that Rula summed it up nicely, and I cannot add a word.
I mean, the situation is even more absurd if we take in consideration that the Hamas leadership doesn't even live in Gaza. So I think that also brings another dimension of how absurd is the Israeli attacks on Gazan civilian population. We receive a lot of questions. We're running out of time. I have the bad news to say to our audience that we're not going to be able to make
De responder a todas as perguntas.
to our invitees for today, but thanks to Andrea, we're able to sum up a few of them, and just two questions I'd like to share with you. I think, Rula, you mentioned this a little bit, but I think you it would be great to hear from you, for both of you. How could, us Brazilians, people living far away, support the movement besides the donations? What else can we do in order to support the message of Standing Together, the actions of Standing Together, that we're doing this webinar because we deeply believe in the work you have been conducting inside Israel? I think Rula failed for a moment her internet connection, but she would probably reconnect soon. Oh, there she is.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm so sorry. I didn't fall. I just have to be in another meeting. So I would have to leave you in the next 2 minutes, and I'm so sorry for that. But I can give it to Uri to answer.
Well, one of the things that would benefit concretely the work that Standing Together is doing on the ground inside Israeli society is if partners abroad, such as yourself, can amplify the voice of the work that we are doing. At the time, it seems that the political discussion abroad in various countries, including in Brazil, is very polarized, very much reduced to hashtag politics. Either hashtag I stand with Israel or hashtag I stand with Palestine. And what we in Standing Together are trying to say is that there is no contradiction. In fact, the two things are complementary: to stand with Palestinian liberation and Palestinian statehood, and to stand with safety and security for Jewish people inside Israel. The two things go hand in hand. We are saying this inside Israeli society and trying to organize people and build a political project around this idea, but making this notion heard and known more throughout the world, throughout the discussion in the peace and solidarity movement in Brazil, in the Jewish community in Brazil, in the Palestinian diaspora in Brazil, having people know about the actions that we, Palestinians and Israelis, Palestinians and Jewish citizens of Israel, are doing inside Israel, making it more known in the public discourse in Brazil, might be able to impact for the better the political conversation in your country. And also, we very much appreciate the solidarity and the support that you people have. I'm sending a link in the chat. I'm not sure if only the hosts can see it or if it's visible to everyone. If only the hosts and the panelists can see it, then it would be nice if somehow technically it can be shared with all of you. We launched an initiative a few months ago called Friends of Standing Together. Standing Together only organizes people inside Israel. We don't have a Standing Together branch in London or Paris or Brazil or Rio or Sao Paulo. But we understand that there are many peoples abroad, Palestinians, Jews, otherwise people who care for the matter and want Palestinian liberation and safety for Jewish people in Israel who follow our work, who support our political project and want to give concrete support to that. We launched Friends of Standing Together as a way to bring together those people who support us, both through a monthly recurrent donation that can be small. We have many people throughout the world who support us through a small amount of money every month. But this Friends of Standing Together is also a platform for you to stay updated. We hold, for example, regular webinars of Friends of Standing Together, where people from throughout the world, Brazil, United States, United Kingdom, European Union, Asia, and elsewhere, go on a Zoom meeting once every few weeks to meet with people from the leadership of Standing Together to get an update about what actions are we doing on the ground, and sometimes also get updates about what can you as people abroad can do to help our work on the ground. So I encourage those of you who like to support our work on a continual basis to visit the webpage of Friends of Standing Together and considering joining this initiative. We already have a few thousands people throughout the world living outside of Israel, but lending their support to us. And this is very influential and very much gives a backing and a support to the work that we are doing.
Thank you, Uri. One last question. I know it's late Saturday night for you in Israel, so just one last question from our audience. It's a pity. So I'd like also to say to everyone who is listening to us that Rula sent us a message saying that she needed to leave. She had another appointment, so she apologized, but she thanked us all for inviting her to this webinar. And just one last question, Uri, is from our audience is what is the movement stand towards the 2018 law of the nation state? Did it compromise, and how it compromised Israeli democracy?
Well, Standing Together actually organized the first demonstration against the nation state law. On July 14th, 2018, that was before the law was legislated in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset. We built a diverse coalition of various groups, both, for example, groups that represent the Arab Palestinian minority in Israel, but also the LGBT Association, the Association of Ethiopian Jews, all sorts of various communities. All of them marched together in Tel Aviv in a march of a few thousand people, putting forward the message saying that the nation-state law impacts negatively not only on the Palestinian minority inside Israel, but on the character of Israeli society and on the democratic space in Israel. Therefore, it's an issue across the board, not only for Palestinians inside Israel, but for other minorities as well. Everyone who needs a functioning democratic space to secure their civil liberties is badly affected by this legislation. Sadly, the legislation passed. Following the passing of this legislation, Standing Together was involved in the other mass protests happening inside Israel, including the mass protest, the mass march in Tel Aviv, organized by the Supreme Follow-up Committee of the Arab population in Israel in the summer of 2018, where tens of thousands of Palestinian citizens of Israel and Jewish citizens of Israel marched. We were very much part of that. What the nation-state law did is to cement the status of Palestinian citizens of Israel as second-class citizens. If before Hebrew and Arabic, for example, were treated by the law as equal languages, now the status of the Arabic language has been downgraded formally. Mind you, even before the nation-state law, the status of the Arabic language was inferior to that of Hebrew. For example, not all government documents and forms were available also in Arabic, some of them only in Hebrew. And in other ways also, Arabic language has a diminished status in the public sphere in Israel. Now, following the nation-state law, this character of the Israeli state has been cemented. This is an incredible setback on the fight for equality. There's a need not only to reform or to correct the nation-state law, but to write it off, the Israeli code book. This should be a basic progressive demand, to get this law cancelled. contrary to what some politicians of the center and center left are saying, that they want the law to be reformed, or that an equality clause should be added to this law. This, I think, is a non-starter if we are seriously talking about national and civil equality within Israel. But also, a show of optimism, one of the things that happened post-nation-state law is that many people turned and made the Arabic language more visible in the public sphere in Israel as a show of resistance towards the nation-state law. For example, we, in Standing Together, our Jerusalem branch, organized an initiative that encouraged cafes and restaurants throughout Jerusalem to produce an Arabic menu alongside their Hebrew menu at the restaurant and the cafe. We had groups of volunteers that go from one cafe to the other or one restaurant to the other, suggest to the owners of the place, would you like to have a menu in Arabic? We would translate it for you. And we had a team of volunteers who translated to it, the menu. And every such a place of business that had a bilingual menu, we put up a purple sticker at the doorstep, the entrance to the restaurant. We called it the quality badge. And we put up a list of these places of business at the Standing Together website saying these places of business now hold the quality badge. Their menus are bilingual. Arabic language is welcome there. So one of the things that happened post the nation-state law is actually those progressive groups such as ourselves have made tremendous efforts to make Arabic language more known in the public sphere, thus undermining the very thing that the legislators wanted to do when they enacted this law.
Oh, Uri, thank you so much. We're arriving towards the end of our conversation. I learned a lot having you and Rula this afternoon with us. I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank Rula, who unfortunately had to leave a little bit before we properly finish our webinar. And the way, if I may say something about the way I've been thinking about the Standing Together as a movement amidst the ongoing level of violence, both of the 7th October attack in Israel and the collective punishment of the Israeli army in Gaza, is that this right-wing coalition and this kind of maintaining of the occupation that benefited Hamas and that benefited Bibi over the years, that had only led to dehumanization. And what I see in you, when I see in Rula, when I see in the movement, is you're trying to humanize and to put people together to discuss politics and to find a political solution that do not pass through militaries, that do not pass through violence, but recognizing the dignity and the humanity in the other. Thank you so much for bringing this amazing work you've been doing for us. To our audience, please follow Standing Together on social media, share Standing Together content either in English, either in Hebrew, either in Arabic, and become a partner. Support Standing Together financially. I think that's the best way we can support the amazing, outstanding work they are doing in the region. And I'd also like to thank Jacqueline and Anna, the translators, who have done an outstanding job in translating my wrecked English to Portuguese. And Uri, would you like to leave us with one last word?
I'll join you in thanking all those who took part in organizing this meeting and helping it happen. We appreciate a lot the ability to speak to audiences such as yourself. Technology does wonders in connecting people across geographical difference. We are living through a very dangerous period of time in the history of this country. Many people are undergoing terrible suffering, and when reading the news, one gets easily very much depressed, and there's a lot to worry about and a lot to fear about, and the times are difficult. But Israeli society and Israel and Palestine don't exist outside of history. We saw conflicts throughout the world, deep, long, bloody conflicts resolved at the end. Had I spoken to someone in Germany or in France in 1945, as the World War came to its end, and I told him that in a few decades, I could go into a car in Paris and drive all the way to Berlin and not see a single border crossing, he would think me as a fool. He would not believe what I'm telling him. We saw so many bloody conflicts come to resolution. We saw so many prolonged and protracted occupations end and have independent states formed. And Israeli society and Palestinian society don't exist outside of history. The laws of history are not everywhere applicable except in this country. We exist in history and we exist in Israeli society. And occupations end, wars end, and this will also be the case in the years-long occupation of Palestinian territories. And we will live to see the day of a Palestinian state alongside Israel and Israeli-Palestinian peace in our lifetime. And we work towards that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Uri. Well, with these amazing final remarks, I have nothing else to say, but thank our audience and hope to stay in touch and get news from you over the next weeks and days. Thank you so much, Uri.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Bye. Thank you.